Hey, Ozark growers. Today we're going to talk about composting and compost teas.
So basically, compost teas, the method that you would do is you take a bag of some type that's like a mesh bag, a straining bag. So we use like a paint strainer bag to make our compost tea because they're pretty big and we're making quite a bit at a time, a large amount. So if you're just doing it at home though, there's a method that we use with a 5-gallon bucket where you just fill it up with water. You take a strainer bag of some sort and you fill it up with your compost, and that can be any type of compost. The type that we like to use a lot is vermicompost or worm compost. So the worms have been breaking it down, and it's worm castings or worm poop that we put in this mesh bag. And then these type of teas will be actively aerated. So the actual name for it would be actively aerated compost teas. And you could put a type of air stone in the bottom or some kind of pump to get the air moving in there because we
have
want
a pump
it.
in there, and it's awesome.
Yeah. Aero mixer.
That's what we use right now is the
Shout
air
out.
mixer.
Yeah, shout out to Aero Mixer.
And it
does
really
great.
good. It moves that water. It gets it going.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
If
But
you're,
a long time ago, when our great grandpas and whatever were composting, what were they doing differently, or
right. So
what teas were they doing?
yeah, a lot of the time I feel like back then, I was just reading Teaming with Microbes a little bit, and it talked about how back then some people were just taking their castings and taking water, putting it in there. Maybe sometimes some people would take like manures and put it in the water to try to make a compost tea, but they weren't aerating it at all. So it was just kind of sitting there and fermenting and brewing up some
Nastiness.
It would probably get to stinking because so the difference between those two types of teas would be the actively aerated kind is having all that air moving, and that will be an aerobic environment, and it will have aerobic microbes in there.
And this probably sounds like a lot of why do I care? But there's a huge difference in what these teas will do for your plants.
Major
One,
difference.
if whether you aerate it or not, it's
Very true.
it's super important.
Yeah, so kind of like what we were saying, back in the day, these compost teas kind of got a bad rap because of the anaerobic fermentation, so to say, process that was happening. So when they're introducing what would be good, so to say, if it was actively aerated, over time, the good microbes and fungus kind of gets breaking down, and it turns into a bacterial dominated liquid. So yeah, it's like
It's a soup.
you kind of the good stuff dies off over time, and so people were letting this compost, what they thought was a compost tea, this ferment go for weeks, however long it took, and then instead of also diluting this, they were directly applying, and it was killing their plants because it was full of
Bad stuff.
Anaerobes.
Yeah, these anaerobes that were just not good for their soil and for their plants, and so it did detrimental things to their soil food web that they had, that they were trying to help.
Which is an innocent mistake because farmers are, you smell compost or you smell cow manure and you're like, oh, that's good for your plants. Put that on your plants. Not in all forms.
Exactly.
Yeah. So one thing that you guys need to know the difference in is anaerobic and aerobic. Aerobic holds oxygen. So it has oxygen in it. So your active aerated tea, all that air in there is adding oxygen, and the beneficial microbes thrive in that environment. There are good and bad, or beneficial and harmful microbes, and like the same microbes such as fungi, bacteria, protozoa, nematodes, there are good and bad forms of this. And the more harmful ones, the toxic ones, the ones that are going to kill your plants, they're in the anaerobic environment because they don't need oxygen to live. These things are parasitic and they can thrive in a environment that's not suitable for those good guys to live in, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So
the good guys are what you need for your plants.
Yeah. And an example of that, in teaming with microbes, he shows a root-eating nematode, and he shows it just barring into the side of a tomato plant. But it's microscopic. You can't see it with your eyes. It would actually be
just
at the root.
Part of the root.
Yeah, barring into the tomato plant root. So, but then he shows a side-by-side example of a farmer who has put the soil food web into practice, and there's actually a fungal hypha that's protecting that plant, and it's just penetrated that nematode and is
It's
killing
wrapped
it
him
and
up
eat it.
like he's in jail.
Yeah.
He's not getting into the roots.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, kind of the purpose of what we're telling you is to put protection in your plants using these good aerobic microbes.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the function of this tea, and it also aids in breaking down that material. The mesh screen that we use holds the compost, and basically all of those organisms that are within that compost, the nematodes, fungus, you guys know all the ones that I just listed. Those guys, you put them in the water, and they're able to flow out of there. So they're so microscopic they can get out of there, while the organic matter that's in the mesh will not be able to. So we're just kind of multiplying them and getting them breeding, and using the water is a good way to apply it because they're easily transferred through that water.
Yeah.
It's an easier way to move them.
Like she said, when your soil is living and it has this fungus and this protozoa and these microbes that are active in your soil, it fights against the anaerobes. So we're not here to say that all ferments are bad, because in organic farming there are plenty of KNF practices and fermentation processes that people go through, and it works great because it still has beneficials in the ferments. But if your soil health is where it needs to be, it should be eating anything that's anaerobic and just letting the good stuff do its job. So it's letting the good bacteria stay, which is providing food for the microbes, and it's this whole system. So there is a balance of these anaerobes as well as aerobic, but in your teas specifically, something that you're brewing up, it needs to be aerobic, so you're getting these good guys to be in excess. You want them to be overflowing in your population to be able to take care of the bad things you may introduce.
And we were talking about how, like, if you start your tea brewing and you let it go for a while, the good guys don't last super long.
Right.
Oh, yes, that is an important thing. You wouldn't want to just brew this compost tea for a week or longer. These teas, if you are aerating it, you would want to do it for maybe 24 to 48 hours before watering it. So they have a short lifespan because they need that oxygen, like I was saying, and they also need food. So
the food's in the soil, so they got to get in there.
Yeah.
But you can boost your population.
Yeah, when you feed the tea itself, your soil should be aerobic, so they are, they have the ability to survive in your soil and do their job. When they're in the tea, over time it becomes anaerobic. So they kind of go through a spike, so to say. You reach maximum population, and then it gets onto the decline. So oftentimes people will introduce a sugar source or a starch either halfway through their tea, right before they feed, this and that. There's different, everybody has their own timing. Shit.
Oh no. It's okay. All right, we're back, everybody. We're back.
How'd I start that?
So to feed our population of microbes, towards the end, we will add a little bit of some molasses in there for them to feed on, boost their population even more right before we water it to our plants.
Yeah, so your tea goes through like your microbe boost. At one point, it'll reach its maximum potential, and then it starts the decline. Some people say this is pretty active or pretty rapid decline. Watching it is really difficult, to see when it's the most and this and that. So people will feed them a starch or a sugar to boost that population. The different time frame, same thing. Everybody has their own time that they like to feed it, halfway, right before, this and that. But it's kind of so if you haven't reached your maximum potential, maybe you give that population a boost to really get up as much as you can. or if you went on the decline, you can try to give them a little bit more so they can get back up as much as possible.
So it's good either way.
Yeah.
Even,
So it's, if you think it hasn't gone long enough, give it that little bit. If it's gone maybe a little too long, give it that little bit. You'll find your time that you think you like the best. But
these organisms as well can reproduce very rapidly.
Yeah.
Because they're so small in there, and so you
That's
still have a
just
chance
weird.
to bring them back to life.
Yes.
That's just weird.
Yeah.
To say they can reproduce a lot because they're so small? What does that mean?
Well, like insects. I mean, if you look at insects, they can reproduce way faster and give birth way faster. Than,
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Like aphids, they're born.
So the
with
gestational period is shorter based on your size.
I don't know.
Not humans.
That's what I'm talking about. Like, it takes us a long time to fully mature into an adult that's able to give birth again.
Something that you read earlier said like,
oh yeah,
1 billion to 4 billion. In what was that time frame?
Man, I don't even know if it said the time frame, but it did say that in that book. It said that in a teaspoon of compost tea that's being actively aerated, it can go from 1 billion to 4 billion bacteria.
There's a fly over there going crazy.
If it's a fly, that's fine. But
Yeah, I can see it.
It better not be a wasp.
Sorry, I just totally did crazy eyes.
You're good. I don't know if it has to do with size or not. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I don't know.
It may or may not have to do with size. I just know that these organisms reproduce pretty fast.
Okay. Interesting.
Now we can tell you guys we're making a tea right now since we just cut down our plants. We are starting up a compost tea of some worm castings that we're going to feed to our living beds as we're getting ready to plant our new plants in there and get some of those microbes for those little baby
And y'all
plants.
have been collecting all kinds of stuff to put in there.
So with
yeah.
with living soil, we're kind of experimental. You can be a little experimental with what you do. So the last week or so, we went through not only like our room and our beds picking mushrooms, but we also went outside, it's springtime. So we went outside and found a variety of different mushrooms, and we actually made a mushroom slurry. So we blended all of these up, let them sit in water for a time, and introduced them into our bed. And then we also put some inside this compost tea that we're brewing. So hopefully with that, we're introducing tons of spores and life into our beds. So whether we get the mushrooms to actually fruit and pop up or not, hopefully we're getting this biodiversity in our beds. We want to see the fruiting bodies, but it's all about under the soil, whatever it can do down there. So hopefully with all this, it's just reintroducing and helping introduce new things into our beds that it might not have already.
And we have quite a bit of mulch, and I know there's some mushroom species that love to grow in mulch. So hopefully they'll be eating on that decaying wood, and we'll see some fruiting bodies of some stuff we don't know. We don't know what to expect. Like Seb said, we're super experimental, so we're excited to see what's gonna pop up here in the next few days.
Yeah, be watching because we'll be posting pictures of that on their story.
So
for sure.
So don't be afraid whenever you're making your compost tea or your worm tea, whatever you want to call it, to kind of throw in a couple mushrooms or a little bit of soil here and there and this and that. It's just about introducing microbes and trying to boost populations of everything. It's biodiversity everywhere.
And it's the point of the tea is to distribute it to all the beds.
Yeah.
So you could go pick a mushroom and stick it in one bed, but it's only benefiting that spot.
Yeah, and so
to get it spread out.
The water collects the spores of the mushroom.
Yeah, with the tea, you don't have to water it in the same amount that you would water your plant with regular water, because it's not about feeding the plant the active quantity of water you need. It's about introducing the microbes. Right. So if you have a room with 30 beds, we brew 250-gallon tanks, halfway, 3/4 most of the time. But if you can brew a 50-gallon tote, do that and put a cup in every bed, because it's introducing these microbes, and then they will populate in the bed themselves. So
and you can make a concentration. You can make a heavier concentration of this worm tea that will have more microbial life, and you don't need to apply it to every square footage in your building. Basically, you just need to introduce it to the bed, and then they'll spread and grow.
It's about the introduction, exactly.
So this is more about longevity, really, and rather than a weekly or daily fertilizer that we do. And like Seb said, we're adding the microbes in there, and then they feed the plants rather than us dumping in something that's going to feed the plants.
Exactly.
I mean, technically we are dumping in something that's feeding the plants, but it's not like the straight fertilizer or nutrients.
We're feeding the soil. So to say. We're trying to feed the soil.
And the soil will feed the plants.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Also, term for you guys, vermicomposting. I don't know if I defined it or not, but vermicomposting just means worm casting or using worms to compost.
Yeah. So
composting is usually just the matter itself breaking down, and vermicomposting is when the worms are assisting to
yeah
do it
Good
quickly.
job,
break
Tiff.
it down. Yeah. There we
You
go.
got
I'm
that.
a scientist today.
Yeah.
Well,
It's good.
I guess that's all you guys really need to know about how we do our compost teas. It may change over time, and we're gonna learn new things throughout the years. So I'm sure we'll talk about this again. But
We'll keep updating it. You guys know
and
how
keep
it is.
experimenting.
yeah, but here's what we know.
All right. Thank you guys so much for watching. Peace.